College is supposed to be the best years of your life. New friends, freedom, parties, and memories you'll never forget. But for some students, the memories they made weren't fun at all. They were terrifying. From haunted libraries to stalkers in the dorms. Tonight you'll hear 10 chilling true college horror stories that prove campus isn't always safe. So lock your door, turn off the lights, and get ready. Because once you hear these stories, then you'll never look at college the same way again. Comment which country you're watching from and what's the time now. This is Appalachian Murmurs. Story 1, The Silent Roommate. It was my first week at college, and move-in day felt like the start of something exciting. I had unpacked all my clothes, hung up a few posters, and was just sitting on my bed waiting for my roommate to show up. By evening, I was already starting to wonder if I was going to have the room to myself. But then the door finally opened. A tall, skinny kid with messy dark hair walked in carrying just one duffel bag. He didn't smile, didn't say hi. He dropped the bag on his side of the room and sat down on the mattress, staring blankly at the wall. I tried to break the ice. "Hey, I'm Jason." I held out my hand. He gave me the limpest handshake I've ever felt, then said, "Eli." That was it. Every question I asked after that, "Where you from? What's your major? Excited to be here?" was answered with a flat yes or no. No emotion, no detail. For the first few days, I just figured he was shy. But he never left the room. He'd sit at his desk, typing away on his laptop until the early hours of the morning, then crawl into bed without a word. The first weird moment happened on the third night. I woke up around 2 a.m. for no reason, and saw him sitting on the edge of his bed, facing me. Just sitting there, perfectly still. I whispered, "Eli, what are you doing?" He turned his head slowly toward me and whispered back, "Sorry." Then he lay down like nothing had happened. I tried to shake it off, but the following night it got worse. I opened my eyes to see him standing right next to my bed. His face was only inches from mine. His lips were moving, whispering something I couldn't make out. When I bolted upright and shouted, "What the hell are you doing?" He stepped back like a deer caught in headlights. His reply? "I was practicing." "Practicing what?" I demanded. His eyes locked on mine. "To see if I could do it while you were asleep." The next morning, I went straight to housing services and demanded a room change. Thankfully, they moved me out within the week. I never saw Eli again, but sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and swear I can still see his pale face leaning over me in the dark. Story 2, The Midnight Library. My school library stayed open until 2 a.m., and during midterms, I practically lived there. One night, I decided to study in the basement where it was always quiet. The old fluorescent lights flickered and the air was heavy with the smell of dust and old paper. Around 12:30, I heard footsteps echoing down the row of shelves. Slow, deliberate footsteps. I turned around. The aisle was empty. I tried to focus on my notes, but then it happened again. A step, then another. Closer this time. The weird part? My table was pressed against the wall. Whoever was making those sounds had to be standing right behind me. I spun around, no one. My pulse quickened. I stuffed my things into my bag and headed for the stairs. But with every step I took, I heard another step right behind me. When I stopped, the extra step stopped too. By the time I reached the security desk, I was shaking. I asked if anyone else was still inside. The guard shook his head. "Nope, I locked the basement an hour ago." I told him I had just been studying down there. His face went pale. "That's not possible. I came straight from there." We went back together. My books were still sitting on the desk exactly where I'd left them, but the chair across from mine had been pulled out. Story 3, The Disappearing Student. There was this girl who always sat next to me in my Tuesday night sociology class. She had long brown hair, a green notebook, and she'd always whisper little jokes to me about the professor. One evening, I asked her name. She smiled but said, "I don't really use social media, you wouldn't find me." A week later, she wasn't in class. Another week passed, then another. Finally, I asked the professor if she'd dropped the course. He frowned. "What student?" I described her in detail. He shook his head. "Nobody's been sitting there all semester." I laughed, thinking he was joking. After class, I checked the official roster online. Her name wasn't there. The next Tuesday, I got to class early. Her seat was empty when I arrived, but halfway through the lecture, I glanced over, and there she was, smiling at me like she'd been there the whole time. Story 4. Frat initiation gone wrong. I wasn't rushing a fraternity, but my roommate was. He begged me to come along for support during one of their initiation nights. Against my better judgment, I agreed. They blindfolded the pledges and drove us out into the woods. I wasn't blindfolded, but I followed along. They dumped us in a clearing and told the pledges they had to stay there until sunrise. No phones, no flashlights. Just survive the night. At first, the guys laughed nervously, but soon we started hearing movement in the trees. Heavy footsteps, branches snapping. Too big to be animals. Then we found it. A crude circle made of sticks and bones laid out in the dirt, right where we were supposed to sleep. One pledge panicked. That's when the noises grew louder, something circling us in the trees. And then pairs of glowing eyes appeared in the darkness, dozens of them. One of the brothers shouted, "Don't leave the circle!" But the pledges broke. They scattered into the woods, screaming. I froze until headlights appeared and the frat brothers called us back to the van. To this day, I don't know if those glowing eyes were part of the initiation or something that lived in that forest. Story 5. The Night Janitor. My dorm had a janitor who worked the night shift. At first I thought he was just thorough, because every night around 2 a.m. I'd hear my doorknob jiggle. One night I locked the door from the inside. I still heard the handle turn, slowly, then stop, then turn again. Minutes later the sound of keys jingled outside, and then the unmistakable click of my lock opening. I sat up as the door creaked open. The janitor poked his head in holding a ring of keys. When he saw me awake, he froze. Neither of us said a word. He just shut the door and walked away. The next morning, I asked the dorm manager why the janitor had a master key to student rooms. She frowned and said, "He doesn't." Story 6. The Hallway Knocker. Every night at exactly 3:11 a.m. there'd be a knock on my dorm door. Always 3 knocks, always the same rhythm. At first, I thought it was drunk students, but whenever I opened the door, the hallway was empty. After a week, my roommate and I tried recording it. The knocks came, loud and clear, but when we played the video back, the audio was completely silent. We finally told our RA. He looked pale and said, "Don't open the door, ever." When we asked why, he told us about a student years earlier. The kid had banged on doors one night, begging for help, before hanging himself in the stairwell when nobody answered. And now, every night at 3:11, he still comes back knocking. Story 7. The Tunnel Below Campus. Every school has urban legends. Ours was about tunnels beneath campus, maintenance shafts from when the school was first built. One night, we found a rusted hatch behind the science building and climbed down. The tunnels were damp and lined with pipes. As we explored, our flashlights revealed dozens of names scratched into the walls, some dating back to the 1940s. But then we saw something newer. My friend's name, scratched deep into the wall, dated a week before. None of us had ever been down there before. Then the sound started, metal scraping across concrete, getting closer. We bolted back, climbed out, and slammed the hatch. The next day we returned, but the hatch was gone, sealed over with fresh concrete. Story 8. The Party Stranger. At a packed house party, I noticed a guy in a hoodie just standing in the corner. He never danced, never drank, just watched. When I left around 2 a.m., I realized he was following me. I cut across campus, sped up, then ran full sprint to my dorm. I swiped my card and slammed the door shut just as he reached the building. The next day, I asked my friends if they'd seen him. They all looked confused. They swore nobody like that was at the party. Story 9. The Study Group. During finals, I joined a study group in the library. They weren't people I knew, but they seemed friendly enough. We studied for hours. Nobody really talked, just scribbling and page-turning. At some point, I checked my phone. It was almost 4 a.m., but the library was supposed to close at midnight. I left quickly without saying a word. The next day, I asked the librarian about late-night groups. She said, "That's impossible. We close at midnight." Later, I walked by the same table. Above it was a bulletin board with old yearbook photos. My stomach dropped. The faces staring back at me were the same people I'd studied with, but the photos were from the 1980s. Story 10, The Final Exam. My professor announced a makeup exam in the old lecture hall. I showed up early, found a seat, and waited as the others filed in. When the test began, I realized something was wrong. Nobody was writing. Nobody was moving. Every student was just staring forward in total silence. I looked down at my paper. Mine was the only one with questions on it. Everyone else's was blank. I stood up to leave, but the professor stepped in front of the door and whispered, "Sit back down. You're not finished yet." The next thing I remember is waking up in my dorm bed. There was no makeup exam, and when I checked the schedule, there never had been. Those were 10 true college horror stories, each one proving that the scariest part of school isn't always the exams. Which story creeped you out the most? Let me know down in the comments. I read every single one. And if you want more chilling tales, make sure to subscribe to Appalachian Murmurs, because the next story might be even darker. Bye-bye.